Assalamu alaikum. Today we commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussain, his family, his followers, and his friends. Tonight we also mark Shama Gariba, translated as the Night of the Orphans. On this night, our hearts are with Bibi Zainab and the rest of the women, children, and Imam Sajjad on the plains of Karbala after the events of that day. This is the final lecture in our Muharram series. My name is Smeya Kaku, and I am a member of the board of directors of the Organization for Islamic Learning. The organization, or OIL, is a charitable non-profit community-based group that strives to build a membership whose main goal is to understand and practice the essence of Islam in an inclusive environment. We promote learning activities based on the teachings of the Quran and the values of its prophet and his family. OIL is a registered charity, and as such, we depend on your donations to continue our programs. Every little helps, and we can provide donation receipts for any amount above $25. We are accepting donations via our website, www.islamiclearning.org. We will be having a Q&A session after the lecture. Questions can be submitted through Menti. The code is 25365869. We would like to start the program with a recitation of Quran by Atiya Ahsan, followed by Noha by Shabir Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I've selected verse 177 of Al-Baqarah, and I will start with the Arabic as usual. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. So the translation, just to say that the first short part is about beliefs, and then it's all about action. It is not righteousness that you turn your faces toward the east or the west, but righteousness is this, that one should believe in Allah and the last day and the angels and the book and the prophets and give away wealth out of love for him to the kindred and the orphans and the poor and the wayfarer and the needy and for the emancipation of slaves and establish the prayer and pay the poor tax and those who fulfill their promise when they make a promise and the patient ones in distress and affliction and in times of conflict. These are they who are true to themselves, and these are they who safeguard themselves with full awareness of divine laws. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Because we missed this afternoon's Jalis, I thought just have a little mercia covering some of those events or at least touch upon them. So when Imam Hussain was in Karbala, his daughter Fatima Sugra sent a messenger to get news about her father and the rest of the family. As per this Mercia composer, this is what the messenger reports back to her upon his return. Salawat. Hussain khak pe baithe hai sar jhukaye hue pisar ki nanni si mayat gale lagaye hue. کہاں یہ قاصد صغرا نے جا کے صغرا سے میں کربلا میں ملا جا کے تیرے بابا سے بیان کیا کروں قسمت نے یہ دکھایا مجھے عجیب حال میں مولا کو میں نے پایا ہے ہزاروں جسم مبارک پہ زخم کھائے ہوئے میں جا کے پہنچا جو نزدیک شاہ جنوں بسر کیا سلام تو بولے جواب کو دے کر کہاں سے آنا ہوا کون ہے تو نیک سیر میرے خیال سے آیا ہے بھول کر تو ادھر زمانہ مجھ سے تو اس دم ہے رخ پھرائے ہوئے میں ہاتھ جوڑ کے بولا کہ قاصد صغرا یہ سن کے شاہ نے مجھ کو لیا گلے سے لگا عریضہ کھول کے پھر میں نے شاہدی کو دیا کہا حسین نے کیا خیر سے تو ہے دکھیا میں بولا صدمہ فرقت ہے وہ اٹھائے ہوئے پکارا میں علی اکبر ہے کس طرف مولا انہیں ہے فاطمہ صغرا نے کچھ پیام دیا کلیجہ تھام کے ہاتھوں سے شاہدی نے کہا کہ قتل گاہ کی جانب نظر تو ڈال ذرا وہ گرم ریت پہ سوئے ہوئے ہے برچھی کھائے کہا حسین نے بیجا تلاش ہے بھائی قضا نبی کے گھرانے پہ صبح سے آئی رفیق جتنے تھے جنت کو سب ہوئے راہی میرا یہ حال ہے دیتا ہے دکھلائی پڑا ہے خاک پہ سب کنبا سر کٹائے ہوئے یتیم مسلم مظلوم نے کٹایا سر پھر اس کے بعد میرے بانجے حسن کا پسر یہ بھوکے پیاسے ہوئے روانہ ہوئے سوئے کوثر اکیلے فوج مخالف میں ہے علی کا پسر پڑے ہے شانوں کو عباس بھی کٹائے ہوئے تو کہیو فاطمہ صغرا سے میری یوں جا کر کہ تیرے باپ کا آدان تن سے کاٹ کے سر چڑھایا بعد میں بھی آہنوں کے نیزے پر تمہارا اب ہے نگہبان خالق اکبر گئے وہ داغ یتیمی تیرا اٹھائے ہوئے پھر اس کے بعد میرے اہل وطن کو ہے یہ پیام تو سب سے کہیو کہ شہ کے گئے ہے تم کو سلام پیو جو پانی رہے یاد تشنگی امام ملا نہیں ہمیں 16 پہر سے آب کا جام हुए है तेग से सूखा गला कटाए हुए हुसैन खाक पे बैठे हैं सर झुकाए हुए सलवात
Thank you for those beautiful recitations. We are fortunate today to have Dr. Ali-Reza Bhojani. Ali-Reza is a lecturer at the Al-Mehdi Institute, co-director of the Center for Intra-Muslim Studies, and a research affiliate at the University of Oxford. A graduate of the Al-Mehdi Institute, his research, teaching, and writing focuses on the intersections between Islamic legal theory, theology, and ethics. He has a PhD from Durham University, and he has held academic posts at the University of Nottingham, the University of Oxford, and the Markfield Institute for Higher Education. Can we please welcome him with a salawat?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع ذنوبنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبو القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم وهو الأصدق القائلين وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. The verses of Surah Al-Baqarah which I've just recited translate loosely as follows. We will surely test them, trial them with at least something of fear, of hunger, of loss of property, of loss of life, of loss of provisions. And we give good news to those who are patient. Those who, when afflicted with affliction, they say, surely we belong to God, and surely towards Him we are returning. These are those upon whom there are blessings from their Lord. These are those upon whom there is rahmah, there is compassion. And these are those who are guided. As the day of Ashura drew to a close, and the strength of Akbar, of Qasim, of Abbas, of Hussain, the grandson of Rasulullah himself, departed this world, the hearts and the minds turned to the women folk, the infirm, and the children who were left behind. And amidst the trauma, amidst the torture and the grief, a story emerges of a lady of light, Zainab al-Kubra, the one who is referred to as al-Masa'ib, the mother of afflictions. Now, earlier on in this series of talks, I quoted part of a tradition attributed to Imam al-Hussain, giving a damning diagnosis of the crisis of religiosity that he found in the people who opposed him. A crisis of religiosity which arguably reverberates through time, to the context we find ourselves in today. That restating some of the lines from that speech is reported that Imam al-Hussain said, "Anna nas abida dunya." Surely people are devoted to this world. وَالدِّينَ لَائِكٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. Their religion hangs on their tongues. يَحُوتُونَهُ مَا دَرَّتْ مَعَايِشِهِمْ. They maintain it while it works for their life. وَإِذَا مُحَسُّوا بِالْبَلَاءِ, when they are given their share of affliction, when they're given their share of difficulties, of trauma, كَلَّا الدَّيَّانُونَ, at that point, the godly are few and far between. When we look at the lives of the prophets, the awliya, the friends of God, Hussain ibn Ali, and this night, Zainab al-Kubra, not only did afflictions, difficulties, traumas, not diminish their faith, diminish their integrity or their quality. Actually, when we look closely, we see that it was through these afflictions, through their responses to them, that they achieved their rank. The real human phenomenon of suffering is something we just cannot deny. It's a reality within this world. Traditions attributed to the Imams and the Prophets describe, this world as a world of suffering. It's dar al-bala wal-inqita. It's the abode of test and trial and withering. And we don't need texts to tell us this. We need to only look around us, whether it's global circumstances, like a worldwide pandemic, whether it's local circumstances, regime change, economic plight, whether it's personal ordeals of life and its tests or trials. It's the way of the world. Maybe we're dealing with disability, bereavement, struggling simply to make friends in a lonely world, struggling to secure an education or earn a living, put food on the table. Life is hard. Now, religious belief and religious practice ought to, on a very, very practical level, assist us, help us navigate these challenges, even thrive through them. Of course, at a theoretical level, questions around suffering, evil, whether that's as a result of human choices or those things which we perceive as being more natural occurrences, are often discussed under this title of the problem of evil. How to reconcile such challenges, with the idea of a loving, capable, and knowing God. Within Islamic thought, across schools and throughout history, this question has been explored and discussed from innumerable perspectives. And unanimously, it's not seen as a problem, actually. Ultimately, suffering is seen, and challenges are seen as an opportunity, a mechanism towards fulfilling human purpose, whether that's in terms of servitude towards God, ibadah, whether it's through stewardship or khilafah, or simply seen in terms of an opportunity towards human flourishing. But how can we outline an account, of how we might understand this phenomenon in life, the reality of suffering, hardships, difficulty, in light of a theology which emphasizes God's justice and emphasizes God's rahmah, his unlimited giving? That's our task today, to just outline some of those resources which have been developed, at least in a justice-orientated, a compassion-orientated understanding of our Creator. So we begin with justice. Of course, as we've discussed over, or as came up, justice is something as an attribute of God, which is universally attributed to the divine by Muslims across the board. All Muslims accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do that which is blameworthy, that which is immoral. Of course, those who emphasize justice as a hallmark of their theological system, they go a little further those who would refer to themselves as the Adliya, those who are emphasizing, justice in their conception of the divine. They say that God cannot do evil. He doesn't do that which is blameworthy. And that which is blameworthy, that which is evil, is something which is potentially rationally intelligible to humankind. So when we're saying he's just, this is in a substantive sense, not in an arbitrary sense. So why doesn't he do that which is blameworthy? Just to give a sense of the rational theological basis behind it. Fundamentally, the theologians say he doesn't do that which is blameworthy. He doesn't do that which is immoral, because if he did, it would imply he is deficient. It would imply that there's something missing in God. Because if he did dhulm, if he did cause oppression, either he's unaware of what he is causing, or he is incapable of stopping it. But he is alim, and he is qadir. When we look around us, we say dhulm, oppression. Typically we can see that it arises, when we look at the root causes of oppression, we see it arises out of deficiency and need, or out of ignorance. That's when we look at, the human causes of oppression, we have to remind ourselves of the value of education, economic upliftment, societal development. Of course, in the case of God, he's needless. He is knowing. He is ghani. He is alim. He knows that which is just, and he is capable of enacting it. He has the motivation and the ability, and thus it is assumed that Allah always works at the optimum, always does that which is best. So this idea of a just, wise, purposeful God still leaves us with the questions. What is this purpose? And how do we reconcile with this phenomenon of difficulty, this phenomenon of suffering? Of course, the fact that God works with purpose is not something which is simply rationally derived. We see again when we open the Quran, again and again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pointing to the reality of purpose in creation. وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاءَ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا بَاطِلًا. Surely we haven't created the heavens and the earth and that which is between them for no reason whatsoever. فَوَيْلٌ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنَ النَّارِ. Look, a belief which breaks perceptions of futility. There is a point to all this. There is worth in all this. Can cast a beautiful spell of purpose on everything that we see and everything that we do. So then what is the benefit and the purpose and the wisdom in suffering and in pain? Look, coming from this justice-orientated perspective, the theologians are arguing that, look, if anything comes from God, it must be moral because he is just and he's capable and he's knowing. So they start to analyze. That analysis helps us because, look, we are talking at a theoretical level now, but it helps us understand and hopefully navigate the real trauma that we experience in life, sometimes on a day-to-day basis. To say, look, we can categorize pain, okay, as something worthwhile, something praiseworthy in many ordinary circumstances. Sometimes when it's deserved, okay, we would say pain is not immoral. Sometimes if the pain brings more benefit than the harm it inflicts, we would say it's not immoral. So for those of you who have been forced to listen to this 10th lecture, hopefully if there's something worthwhile in it, it will not have been immoral for you to bear with the pain. Look, pain is also, unanimously seen as not immoral when it's a means of protecting from greater harm. Whether it's the simple pain of a jab in my arm, which may protect me, or whether it's the cutting off of a gangrenous leg. Nobody would say it was immoral to save the rest of the body if the only way to do so was to remove the leg. The theologians go further. They say, look, pain is not immoral when it's in accordance with the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon which everything depends. Now, they very interestingly point to a very useful distinction. Look, when we think of afflictions, when we think of masa'ib, those things which affect humankind, sometimes we can look at them from an individual and limited perspective, or we can consider them from a communal and holistic perspective. In both cases, this is consistent with God's wisdom and God's purpose. How? Of course, before we look into the explanations, we have to recognize that, yes, the human mind is limited. Human understanding is limited. And we typically focus on the individual perspective. We typically focus on the here and now without looking at the holistic, without considering the compensations in the other world or the non-material benefits that we might be accruing here and now. Look at natural disasters. This is a typical problem when we think of the problem of evil. Now, natural disasters, a storm, a tsunami, an earthquake, in itself, are these really something bad when we look at them from a holistic perspective? If we could harness the energy, of an earthquake, and we had sufficient warning systems, would the earthquake be good or would the earthquake be bad? In and of itself, the earthquake is not bad. But interestingly, we're seeing the devastation in Haiti. I was reading a piece today that pointed to say that, look, in 2011, when they had their previous devastating earthquake with 250,000 souls lost, the world's engineers descended on Haiti and they set up new systems for building. Yet to this day, the rules of the government were never applied. People, either due to economic reasons or due to corruption, didn't observe those rules which could have protected the devastation that we are witnessing today. I had a colleague who was working in a university who was teaching disaster management. And he was working in Pakistan a decade ago in the earthquakes there in the northern region. And I asked him, we got into this discussion. He said, look, these theologians who give these theological arguments, they're not really good. They're not really bad in themselves. So on the ground, what was the experience? He shook his head. And he said, the case in Pakistan of the deaths was not a natural disaster. Says the deaths in the north of Pakistan 10 years ago was a human disaster because of substandard building works, profiteering, lack of responsibility, and human corruption. In and of itself, if we could harness that power, how much could we cure through those acts of God? Irrespective of this, we can't deny that within these human disasters, natural disasters, there is suffering. The results of war, the results of death, the results of deprivation are clear for us all to see. And when we look at the individual perspective, leaving this holistic perspective aside, it seems intolerable. It seems unjust. And it seems devoid of purpose. At this point, the theologians try to tell us to look back to the holistic. So look, it's part of Allah's system to afford humankind a degree of capacity and a degree of free will. And we've seen that even in the aftermath of such disasters, and such occurrences, we see communities coming together. We see that those shocking incidents can shake humanity to its core, allowing for progression, allowing for a return to each other and towards God. Look at even Karbala, the impact then and the impact now. It was like a call to the Muslim conscience and remains so. Of course, this still doesn't belittle the pain and suffering felt by individual family members, by the real pain and difficulties the innocent children, and the unwarranted suffering. But the justice, having a belief system which is built upon justice of God and wisdom of God, demands that he will recompense for such loss. Look, it's reported, and I think I mentioned this tradition earlier on in the series, it's reported that the Prophet of Islam has stated that even the miscarried child, the child who didn't experience this world of no will of his own, will be raised on the day of judgment with no less than the martyrs in the way of God. Look, there is unwarranted suffering in this world, but a God worthy of worship will compensate for it, okay, in the world to come. And central to Islamic belief is that there's more to life than the apparent here and now. We tend to see pain, we tend to see suffering, we tend to see loss through our limited individual eyes, focused on the here and now, whereas our doctrinal teachings unequivocally remind us that this world is passing like the lining of a cloud. It's simply a road upon which we traverse. Look, the teachings of Islam, this idea of God, developing a relationship with God, is supposed to help us navigate these challenges. Now, just because we can't always understand, what's going on, why this is happening. Yes, at one level, we can be assured that if it's unwarranted, there's something more for me to come. There is the real life to come. But how can we start to embrace these challenges? Is by remembering that they come to us from that giving God, from the Lord of Rahmah. At this point, I want to quote a tradition attributed to Imam Sadiq, salamullahi alayhi, where he's reporting a conversation between Hazrat Musa and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. The tradition goes as follows. It says, Anna ya Musa, ma khalaqtu khalqan ahabbu ilayya min abdi mu'min. Allah is speaking to Moses and he's saying, I haven't created any creation more beloved to me than my devoted believer. Wa innama abtalihi lima huwa khayran lahu. And I surely only test him and try him with that which is good for him. Wa u'afihu lima huwa khayran lahu. And I give him ease in those places that are good for him. Wa ana a'lamu bima yaslahu alayhi amri abdi. I am the most knowing of that which is most befitting for my servants. فَلْيَصْبِرْ عَلَى بَلَائِهِ. So be patient with my tests. وَلْيَشْكُرْ نِعْمَائِهِ. He should be grateful for my blessings. وَلْيَرْضَعْ بِقَضَائِهِ. He should be satisfied with my decree. أَكْتَبَهُ فِي الصِّدِّيقِينَ عِنْدِي. And then I will write him amongst the truthful with me. Look, despite acknowledging the limits of our understanding, assuming that whatever comes to us must be just. If it's unfair now, God will make up for it in the life to come. We also need to recognize that there are benefits, developmental benefits, through these challenges and difficulties that we face on a micro level and on a macro level, in a non-material sense, in a substantive moral sense, in the realist sense, in helping us fulfill our potential. So where can we identify some of these developmental benefits of masa'ib, of afflictions? Look, at one very clear level, something again we experience phenomenologically in the world, is that difficulties are a means to actualizing potential. Look, it's when we're pushed to our limits, to the point, where we feel we're at an end, That's when we start to perform acts which we thought were beyond our own imaginations. Look at how quickly, medicine has moved in recent times. Or if we think back to the context of world wars and the millions that perished in those wars, but through it we had the development of penicillin. Penicillin has saved lives beyond count. Look, they say necessity is the mother of all invention. Okay, and we see it very, very clearly. Look, this accepting that this is a world of suffering and difficulty. This isn't a fatalistic reading of the human condition. Far from it. Look, to accept the world is blighted by suffering, tests, and trials is not fatalistic. It's actually a platform for the explosion of human potential. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises, Inna ma'al usri yusra. Surely through difficulty, with difficulty is release, is ease. We see texts suggesting that these difficulties are kafaratan lidhunub. They can be a means of compensating for my own sins. But this again is not negative. It's not spiteful. It's for my own benefit. The difficulties that we experience, natural, human, they can be a bridge to warn us and return us to the truth. Allah says again and again, it was in the verses of the Quran which I opened with, وَبَلَوْنَاهُمْ from Surah As-Sad this time, وَبَلَوْنَاهُمْ بِالْحَسَنَاتِ وَالسَّيِّئَاتِ. We will test them with goodness, with ease, and with evil. It's interestingly here that the ayat of the Quran says, the first test is with ease, with goodness, with beauty. وَبَلَوْنَاهُمْ بِالْحَسَنَاتِ وَالسَّيِّئَاتِ. We'll test them with good and with evil. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجَعُونَ. So that they may turn to me. They may turn to godliness. They may have an opportunity to exhibit my beauty. And this is what we see in the lives of the saints. That the difficulties, the traumas that they experienced were a condition for their reaching the loftiest heights of human completion. Look, traversing the difficulties and the growth acquired through them is a means for completing ourselves. And this is why the texts tell us, we find in the hadith, that ashadd al-bala al-anbiya, that the most severely have tested were the prophets themselves. But when we look at the lives of the prophets and we appreciate their achievements, societal, spiritual, ethical, it's not, and we look at the case of the Prophet Muhammad, first and foremost, we started this series of lecture and mentioning him. It's appropriate to end mentioning him. It wasn't that he achieved his rank despite the fact that he was an orphan, despite the fact that he was unlettered, didn't have, an education of such. It wasn't that he achieved this rank and these impacts in society despite having marital problems. He had real marital problems. His sons died in his lap. He was oppressed bitterly. No, the Prophet achieved his station, not despite these things, but through how he responded to these very, very human, ordinary challenges. It was through these that he grew towards Allah, towards demonstrating that beauty of God through everything that he did. And maybe it was this type of God-centered vision, of life, of difficulties, of development, of human purpose, and the value in suffering and in personal growth and its subsequent societal impact that we see in Zainab al-Kubra. Look, she was grieved. We talk about this lady of light, this lady of strength, but she was broken. If we read the reports, even in those early reports, Okay, in those, widely narrated traditions, even in the Ibn Makhlaf, so on and so forth, on the nights approaching Ashura, you see accounts of her in tears, seeing the trauma of what is to come. She was grieved on the eve of Ashura, such that when we look at the ziyarat literature, we can see her imagined or reported to calling out over the body of her brother Hussain, Ya Muhammad, Hada Hussain, Tasfi alayhi rihu as-siba, majzuz al-ra's min al-qafa, katil al-awlad al-baghaya, wa huznahu alayka, Ya Aba Abdullah. She's reported or imagined to have called out, O Muhammad, to her grandfather, no less. Here is Hussain with the east wind scattering dust over him, head cut from his neck, a victim of the sons of whores. Oh, great is the grief for you, Aba Abdullah. She pained. The Ziyarat literature quotes her, imagines her to say, بأبي من نفسي له الفداء بأبي المحموم حتى خضا بأبي الأجشان حتى مضى بأبي من شيبته تقتل بالدماء. Dear to me as my father is he for whom I would have sacrificed my own life. Dear to me is my father, is he who was sorrowing until death. Dear to me as my father is he who thirsted until death. Dear to me as my father is he whose white beard dripped with blood. Zainab al-Kubra felt the pain. She experienced the trauma, but through it she grew. Once those giants of humanity had returned to their Lord, it was her who stood, who gathered the orphans, who built resilience, who turned that grief into strength to such an extent she could stand in the courts of Yazid, in the courts of Ibn Ziyad, and speak with strength, dignity, and eloquence, complaining to none other than God. When asked by Ibn Ziyad, how do you feel Allah has treated your brother Hussain? She makes that statement of statements. I have seen nothing but beauty. Through difficulty, through trauma, we have an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to move towards that beautiful potential which is within. We have an opportunity to move towards those models that we see in Hussain ibn Ali and Zainab al-Kubra. Allahumma laka alhamdu hamda ash-shakirina laka ala musabihim. Alhamdulillahi ala azim al-raziyati. Allahumma razukani shafa'at al-Hussain yawm al-wurud wa thabbit li kadama sidkin indaka ma'a al-Hussain wa ashab al-Hussain alladhina badalu wajhum dun al-Hussain alayhi salam. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He accepts the efforts of all those who have participated in these gatherings, who have organized them, those who have taken the pain to listen to them. Hopefully there was some value in them. Anything that was good is from God. Forgive me for my errors and my slips. May Allah accept all the beautiful hajat of the people who are here, relieve our suffering, accept our du'as, help us be positive role models in society, embracing the spiritual ethics of Hussain ibn Ali, developing a belief and a practice which moves us towards God, not just in name, beyond the tongue, but to be positive bearers of goodness with all those who are around us, our human family, our Muslim community, our families, such that we can, live up to this beautiful mandate, of being with Hussain in this world, and the next. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
Thank you very much for the insightful talk. We will now continue with Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, then please go to menti.com and the code is 25365869. You will be able to listen to all previous lectures on the YouTube channel, and please consider subscribing to be notified of all lectures and programs that we have. We have a few questions. The first one is, Karbala describes so much pain and suffering, yet a few Ashura ziyarat and prayers contain curses wishing suffering on others. How do we reconcile God's rahmah and forgiveness with this tradition?
Sure. Okay, so excellent question. I think the Karbala narrative, of course, includes suffering and torment and grief, but it also includes huge beauty. I think yesterday I described it as a diamond, and I think we have to emphasize the beauty in those human stories and those divine stories. I think that's very, very important to get that balance right. So there's huge beauty. When we look at the ziyarat literature, again, if we look at the ziyarat al-Ashura, again, it's very, very beautiful. It asks for, I quoted at the end there from the, traditionally recited ziyarat al-Ashura. So, oh Allah, to you is the praise of those who are thankful, even in their afflictions. This is so profound, right? Okay, and this is taking spirit from, the memory of Karbala. It asks that, oh Allah, give me a strong, firm foothold to be with Hussain and the companions of Hussain. I make my qualities such that I stand up to the mandate of Hussain. Okay, that I can give my all, not through death, right? Okay, but through my life. This is very beautiful. This is very, very positive. Okay, so I think the overwhelming tone within the Ziyarat al-Ashura, actually, not speaking about its authenticity, its development, so on and so forth, right, is actually positive. The question of the la'an is a very, very important one as well. Okay, so I think we've got to have, here, I mean, some will have heard this stuff before, but it's worth repeating. Because look, what's going on in this la'an? Okay, so there's one thing is how la'an was used in the time of the Quran and the time of the Prophet in the early generations. And it's a sense of disassociation. Okay, literally what's going on, this is asking Allah to remove his mercy from those people, right? Okay, remove his mercy from those who oppressed Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, right? But what's actually going on here is a sense of disassociation. I'm trying to associate myself with good and disassociate myself with bad, right? So at the core, as a practice, we can see that, as a practice, that seems to me at least where the practice has emerged from. Okay, a sense of disassociating with bad and associating with good. How it's been used and developed through time and history, in some cases, is deeply problematic. There's no doubt about it. All right. So, it's not seen, it's no longer seen in that way as disassociating with bad or associating with good. It's often seen as cursing. Right. Okay. And the distinction between la'an and sub, okay, has become blurred. Right. And I think we have to be very conscious of this, especially in the public performance of such devotions. Very conscious of this. Right. Because we see traditions attributed to, for example, Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi, during the Battle of Siffin. Look, to curse another, okay, is not befitting of a human being. Okay, it's not befitting of the ethics of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Certainly not. And taking precedent from Imam Ali, there's a tradition. I'm sorry if I'm extending this question, response to this question. Yeah, and there's a tradition in the Nahj al-Balagha where Imam Ali is passing some of his companions during the Battle of Siffin. Right, so this is an intra-Muslim war. On one side you had Imam Ali and his people. On the other hand, you had Muawiyah and his people, the people of Sham. They're in war. The war lasted some months, so there was a siege. It was extended. He's walking amongst his camp, and he hears some of his people cursing the people of Sham. So this is actually a situation of war where they're cursing people who are there to kill them. Yeah, Imam Ali said in that state, "Ana akrahu an takuna min as-sabbabin." Said, "I hate for you to be amongst the cursers." Incredible, right? He goes on and he says, "If only you had described their state, critically analyzed their actions. That's sound." He said, "You would have been more appropriate in what you said. If not, or go further, said, if only you had prayed to God to protect their blood and protect your blood and to reconcile amongst us, this would be more befitting. Right? So the ethics of Ahlul Bayt are very, very clear. I think we have to be careful with this ziyarat literature. Now, as hopefully I've pointed to here, there is much beauty in it. Okay, I've quoted it here. Right? We have to understand its context and its usage and be very, very careful that its usage is consistent with that broader ethical, moral, rational, God-centered framework. Okay, where it's interpreted as cursing of personalities beloved to others, this is absolutely unbefitting and explicitly prohibited by the Imams themselves, as I hopefully have quoted, by making reference to the natural balagha.
Thank you. We have a follow-on question, actually. So is it that there is a misinterpretation of the word, or is there a better word that we should be using instead of lana?
So I think there is, this is a difficulty. Somebody asked me about linguistic analysis before, right? Okay, as language changes with time, okay, the implications of language, the broader understanding of how language moves, okay, yeah, changes with time. Right now, even internally within Shia usage of these li'an, okay, and broader, this is understood as cursing. All right, and I think we have to be accordingly very sensitive to the way that it's used, okay? From a personal devotional practice, okay, at best is disassociating, okay, with the causes of oppression, okay? So in a devotional sense, this is how I would understand it, okay? In a public sense, conscious of our relationships with others, conscious with our explicit Quranic, prophetic, imamic model of spirit of reconciliation. Yeah, if it means dropping such performances, we should drop such performances.
Thank you. The next question we have is, we are told that after hardship comes ease, and we often use that to try and comfort those who are suffering. But do we also have a religious and moral obligation to help those who are suffering?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this was, I tried to just, maybe I didn't elaborate enough. And accepting the reality of suffering isn't an excuse for inaction. Actually, accepting the reality of suffering and difficulty and hardship, okay, it's supposed to be a platform for action. It's a potential for us to move, okay? It's a potential for us to become relievers of suffering. It's the potential for us to become uplifters. It's the potential for us to become givers of rahmah, to be spreaders of justice. So accepting that this is a world of difficulty should inspire us and should obligate us, okay, to be active in the, alleviation of those difficulties. Absolutely.
Thank you. I think we'll end there. As this is our final talk, the organization would like to extend its thanks to Dr. Ali-Reza Bhojani for his insight, for helping us think and to look deeper within ourselves at the spiritual ethics of Islam and Imam Hussein's message. We would also like to thank our Marshia reciters, Nazneen Muhammad Taki, Sheila Hirji, Shabir Muhammad, Mohsin Dala, and Maisha Sayal. We'd also like to thank our Quran reciters, Sarah Datu, Hana and Iman Jiwan, Razia Datu, Kumail and Danielle Said, Samara Saira, and Kazim Rizvi, and Atiya Hassan. We would also like to thank Hussain Kareem and Hussain Sajan for their tireless efforts in maintaining the live stream and YouTube uploads. And as an individual, I would also like to acknowledge and thank the members of the board who work tirelessly behind the scenes to help with everything that the organization does in Muharram and beyond. And as usual, I would like to now end with the Surah Fatiha for those who are no longer with us.